Hi, this is Paul. I'm sort of attending to some of these decisions piecemeal. It's fitting in better in my schedule. Sorry for some of you who really love the 2 hour long videos, and cheers from some of you who like shorter, more directed videos because they're just certain issues at Synod you're more interested in than others. So it's just the way that I have my time and my availability to make these little things. Now, in a previous video, I showed how to find things from the live tab. The Another good way to do it is to get it from the playlist, and that's perhaps a better way. So if you go to on YouTube, you go to CRCNA, and then it has created playlists, and they have a Synod 2023 playlist, and you'll find all the videos from Synod 2023, and you can see you have Inspire 2022. I haven't watched those actually. I'll probably want to take a look at those. You have Synod 2020, 2022. You have Inspire 2022, and so yeah, they have a lot of good playlists, and I'm sure a lot of other material that you might be interested in, all the way back to Synod 2013. So it's kind of, I think, even though it's a little makes people a little bit nervous having these recordings around for historical purposes, this is absolutely essential because you can really sort of dive in beyond just the paper level and get a sense of Synod, even if you don't get the same feel for it. I want to address what was a study committee report that was another one of these that was laid over during the pandemic. And this one was on ecclesiastical marriage. And this one is kind of a sleeper. It's really a very important thing. And I think a lot of people don't quite understand what this is. And this actually does have links to the women in church, not the women in church office, but the same-sex marriage debate. Because, of course, before same-sex marriage became the law in the United States and Canada, the church could just basically ride the shirt tails of the government with respect to what was a legal marriage. In the United States and Canada, there was no bigamy. You could only be married to one person at a time, and all marriage was between a man and a woman. When same-sex marriage came along, suddenly there was a difference between what was considered marriage subject to the Word of God in the church and in public. That is the ruling. There's a long-term point in the Christian Reformed Church order that ministers are not allowed to perform weddings that are outside of basically that they can only do weddings with it that are. I should just read the church order. This is Article 69 in the church order. Consistories shall instruct and admonish those under their spiritual care to marry only in the Lord. Christian marriages should be solemnized with appropriate admonitions, promises, and prayers as provided in the official form. Marriages may be solemnized either in a worship service or in a private gathering of relatives and friends. Ministers shall not solemnize marriages which would be in conflict with the Word of God. So obviously, part of the same-sex marriage hinges on that. And so when the laws in Canada and the United States were pretty much just traditional marriage, the church just accepted marriages as they came to them. Now, something began to happen over the last couple of decades with people living longer and with some benefits, survivor benefits packages changing. Increasingly, we would have requests from longtime members who were divorced or perhaps widowed, and the request would be, could you marry us in the church, but we're not planning on filing anything with the state? And ministers would hear that. And often these would be members who were in the church for a very long time, and members in good standing, and members who would tithe and be important supporters, former office bearers of the church. And they basically would say, well, if I get married legally, some of the survivor benefits that I get would no longer come to me. So this way, if we're just married in the church and not in the state, then we keep the survivor benefits and what? Well, because they knew that if they started living together, people in the church would say, why are you living together without being married? And this sort of, especially given all of the stuff going on in terms of human sexuality in the culture, getting married in the church basically was the church handing a license to have sex between the couple. And so, well, the state doesn't seem particularly interested in terms of who you have sex with. So if we just get married in the church, then everybody will know we're sleeping together, we're a couple, yada, yada, yada. But we keep getting our survivor benefits from our dead spouses. So, Pastor, why don't you just marry us here? And some pastors were going along with it, saying they're lovely members of the church. What does this hurt? But it also sets up a situation where you're married in one context to a person and not in another context. When I was a missionary in the Dominican Republic, one of the reliable ways to sort of assault a pastor's reputation would be to charge that they had a family in Haiti and a family in the Dominican Republic. When the same-sex marriage thing came along, a lot of the solution offered by a number of people was, well, in places like the Netherlands, the church marriage and the state marriage are really two different things. And a lot of different countries actually manage marriage in different ways. Another little tidbit, even in a place like the United States, marriages are governed by states, not by the federal government. And that's why Obergefell was sort of a landmark ruling, because suddenly you had national marriage policy. And if you delve into the same-sex marriage history, you'll find that, Clinton had signed a law and so on and so forth. So there's a lot going on with this. And so eventually a synodical study committee was mandated, and that study committee was requested to, settle this. Should ministers marry people only in church and not in the state? Now, this gets a little tricky because, again, part of what the same-sex marriage debate has brought to us is the assertion that churches shouldn't police sex. And when people say that, I always say, do you want the sex of your minister policed? Like, if the minister's wife is okay him having a girlfriend, do you mind him dating around in the congregation? How about the age of the people he's going to date? In other words, should churches police sexuality? There are couples in the Christian Reformed Church who are in their senior years by virtue of how old they are, unless, you have an Abraham and Sarah situation. No children are going to come to play, and they are living together, and churches are kind of like, don't really want to say anything, don't want to be confrontative. So this is all part of this question of sort of how church discipline has kind of gone away. So I knew this was coming to the Synod. It wasn't treated in last year's Synod, and I thought, I wonder how much debate this is going to get. As I said, synods are funny because they kind of start, and every synod has its own character. And I was just watching, I had a family Zoom meeting, just talking to my mother and sister and brother-in-law, which I do on Monday evenings. And I was keeping an eye on Synod, and I noted, Synod did wake up, and it got woken up by Scott Vanderplug. And so I haven't listened to that discussion yet, and I'm super interested to listen to the discussion because it's really vital. It's about the decline of the CRC. But this one, I was really curious about, where's this one going to go? Because this one actually has some angles to it, and those angles came up in the debate. So let's start.
Move that way. Also, I'll just start with A. First recommendation, A, that Synod instruct the General Secretary to disseminate the report on ecclesiastical marriage to the churches of the CRC to serve as guidance regarding the issue of ecclesiastical marriage. And as I move that, I'll ask you a question. Do I have to make that as a motion, or has that already happened because it's out? Just for clarity.
We make it a motion because that clarifies what Synod officially thinks of the report.
And this is, if Synod likes the report, basically says we're going to send this out to the church and say this is Synod's guidance on this issue. And so when clergy, and this has been around for a few years already, clergy initially were sort of blindsided by this, and you'd have discussions with other clergy. Hey, I got a strange request. I was asked to, this couple wants to be married. They want to be married in the church and not in the state. What do you think? And I think a number of clergy went along with it.
That's fine. It's moved.
So we have recommendation A in front of us, that Synod instruct the General Secretary to disseminate the report In some ways, that's already been done, but we'll continue to make that available to the churches, and it serves as guidance regarding the issue of ecclesiastical marriage. That motion is on the floor in front of us. Any questions, discussions? Go ahead, are you in the queue? Well, go ahead anyways. We'll honor it this time, but anyone else who wants to speak, try to get into the queue. Thank you, Bernie.
Classes Huron. We were instructed in our committee of pre-advice to specify whether it was the General Secretary or the Office of the General Secretary. Which is it?
Remember when I talked about structure and language?
In recommendation A.
Andy, they listen to you. It's Office of General Secretary, no the, and I know it sounds like a minor point, but we'll correct that. Thank you for remembering that, Bernie.
But notice, no discussion on the substance yet.
It's Office of General Secretary. Any other questions or points for clarification? All in favor of recommendation A, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. That
Not a big deal.
motion carries.
So B, that Synod strongly advise pastors of the CRC not to solemnize ecclesiastical marriages as defined in the report. You can look that in there if you need to again. As sanctioned and solemnized solely by the church to the exclusion of the state or civil government, whereby a couple is considered married in the eyes of the church but not in the eyes of the state. For the grounds, the biblical record clearly teaches us to submit to the governing authorities in all matters that do not conflict with the Word of God. Historically, Reformed churches have acknowledged the role and right of civil authorities to regulate marriage in their jurisdictions. In both the United States and Canada, there could be negative legal consequences for the participants and/or for pastors who solemnize a non-civil or ecclesiastical marriage.
All right, that motion is on the floor in front of us. Questions, observations, comments, please put your name in the queue if you're interested in speaking. Seeing none, I judge we're ready to vote on recommendation.
You know, everything's just, folks are kind of asleep. It's like, there's nothing to see here.
B.
Who's the name, Paul?
Here comes one. Patrick, Central California.
Patrick, Central California. My question is,
From the Emmanuel Christian Reformed Church in Ripon, California, one of our delegates from our fine classes.
why is it strongly advised rather than encouraged not to or something like that, given the grounds?
Well, strongly advised, it's stronger than encouraged not to. I think encouraged not to is it's just kind of too weak. And we didn't go to the line of forbid because we didn't feel like we're...
And they didn't go to the line of forbid, which was very interesting.
Is that what you're asking? Not...
So you're saying there's a chance.
Instead of stronger? I think we wanted just to stay away from the word forbid. And quite honestly, this is the exact wording you had in the report. We didn't change this.
And that's usually what the committees do.
This is the wording the reporters gave us.
There's the fine delegates from Classes Central California.
As well from the study committee, but it's a recognition of that. On the other side of it, we also have to recognize we want to seriously stay away from encouraging anybody to do something that would be deemed illegal, because that would be a bad idea.
Well, and the funny thing is that if you forbid it, then at least the couple comes to the minister, and the minister says, can't do it. You know, they forbid ministers from performing same-sex marriages. So it's very interesting, because then the minister says, sorry, I can't do it. I just can't do it. It's against the rules. I'm strongly encouraged not to.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else. Are we ready to vote? All right, on recommendation B, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion carries.
One person voted against. He's like, okay, done deal. The rest is just sort of cleanup.
Okay, ready for C. That Synod encourage the churches to respect and honor the marriages of immigrants who did not obtain a civil marriage prior to arriving in Canada or the United States, and counsel them in the understanding of Christian marriage and its relationship to civil authority in our countries. For grounds, it's not the case that in every country where immigrants have come from that the civil authorities regulate marriage, so it might not have been possible for a civil marriage to occur. Also, in the interest of grace and acceptance, we want to acknowledge the beautiful Christian marriage traditions that have developed in various cultures. And third, the law is permissive but not prescriptive in this regard. And if I may, in this respect, when we talked about this, one of the pieces of conversation that came out, our Korean delegates were speaking to the different cultural issues that they have as well around this, that this report doesn't really answer fully. So there is some wondering about if there needs to be some more work done culturally on this beyond just the dominant culture in our midst here. Because to our dominant culture, this probably speaks very well, but to some other cultures, it's not maybe as clear or the same for some places. So that needs to be considered.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so basically, yeah, these things can get messy. They can.
For that clarification, Dan. So recommendation C is before us. Questions, comments? I don't see anyone's name on the list. Stanley, did you want to speak to that?
There's a piece, for me, there's a piece missing, and that is the marriage from the Native American perspective, or indigenous peoples. It only talks about the immigrants. There is a long-standing in the Navajo culture, or even in any indigenous cultures, there are marriages that are outside the church. And many of our people that are coming into the church have been married traditionally. And then do we tell them your traditional marriage is wrong? Now you have to be remarried in the church? Or how does that work? And that I was trying to figure that out with this recommendation.
If I may, I'm
Oh, you've got ceremonies. We got traditional ceremonies that are not Christian ceremonies. And by the way, we're not immigrants. You're the immigrant.
going to give an answer, and if the study committee wants to come up here, Lauren might want to as the lawyer, but, and first of all, Stanley, my apologies for not having also included that in my prior comments, because I understand the culture for you is also different, and it probably should have had a different wording in the motion instead of just immigrants. It should have, you're right, it should have included you. And that speaks right to that point that it is different. I have to admit, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think this has a full answer for you and your culture, and that needs to have. We need to have the input into some of the writing of these reports, like this one, from the Navajo culture, the Zuni culture, from the Koreans, and many others, to help us write these things better, because we're. And I'm not blaming you, I'm blaming us. We did not include your perspective. And so that is a shortcoming that we have, and we're recognizing that as we went through as this.
So I know some in my audience get real itchy and real reactive about the diversity stuff, but here it is. The Navajo have a real point. And a little bit of representation on that committee. If there was someone in that room, they'd say, yeah, wait a minute. The language you have here, we're not immigrants.
The study committee, and I know that doesn't give you an answer what you need to do or should do, but we do apologize that that's not been clarified on our part, and that should have been done differently.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yes, if you're interested. In number 2, where it says the beautiful Christian marriage traditions that have developed in various cultures, were we to strike the word Christian from that, we would be able to allow Stanley to go back and say, the marriages that you have experienced in your cultures are considered beautiful and therefore are acceptable in our eyes.
So now we've started Synod, because now we've got the advisory committee report and something came up, and so the language isn't quite right, and so we got to fix the language, and how are we going to do this on the floor? And so, well, let's just take out that word marriage then, and this is a beautiful tradition, but what about someone coming from a culture and they've come to Christianity and they really feel like they have left darkness and come to light, and they don't believe their marriage was beautiful? I mean, you have this with baptism, you have this with a lot of things, and Americans sort of just like to say, well, let's just call it beautiful and that'll smooth everything out and everything will be nice. Well, and then again, now we're trying to fix the language on the floor. Uh-oh, that doesn't really go too well.
If that's what we want to say.
I'm not sure I'm clear on what are you making a motion to amend?
Yeah, how about that? I'll try and make a friendly motion and see if they agree it's friendly.
Well, first of all, I want to know.
So let's talk about this whole business, because this comes up a lot at Synod. One of the things, if it's a friendly amendment, then you don't have to go through all the procedural things to really get the language. This is a motion to amend, and there's a whole structure in terms of rules of order. Synodical rules of order are not exactly Robert's rules of order. They're a little bit simplified, and there's a structure, and so most people just come up with a suggestion. And then the chair, of course, has to be like, well, what am I supposed to do with your suggestion? And would you like to make a motion to amend? Oh, yeah, let's do that. But if it's friendly amendment, then we don't have to vote on it and everything. So is it a friendly amendment?
You're in under the C. You're in the grounds in 2, correct?
That's correct.
Well, on the one side, I guess I don't see the problem with that, but on the other side, we're not voting on grounds. We're voting on the motion.
And so this guy behind the podium, he's the reporter for the advisory committee, and the guy sitting next to him, he's the chair of the advisory committee. But this is an advisory committee that has been working from a synodical report that they, for the most part, have just taken the language from and have put it in their report. And then the question is, is that really good for everyone?
I mean, the grounds come with it.
Well, the grounds go with the motion.
I know, but
so.
and that's fine. I don't have any problem with that personally, but can I ask?
Your suggestion is that we simply strike Christian in grounds number 2.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I think it would be wise before we agree to that statement that we really do check with someone from the committee that wrote this, because I think that's important, because they did
And he means the Synodical Study Committee, whose work has been sitting on ice for a few years.
a lot of work to put this together. And
I would certainly agree with that.
I'm just taking my look around, and they're not waving their hands at me. Just, oh, there we go. Thank you very much. Hand waving.
Yeah, just let us know who you are, and I assume you're from the committee, and then speak to it, please. Thank you.
It'd be really awkward if I wasn't. My name is Gail Dornbos. I'm from the committee. So I think part of our recommendation in this is that it does deal more so with immigrant communities who come from other traditional cultures that are outside of a Western kind of dominant North American culture. And so I take Stanley Jim's note that we probably should have included that into this recommendation because it is in the report. We do deal with not just immigrant communities but also Native communities in the US and Canada. And so I think one of the things that we did talk about as a committee is that as we defined ecclesiastical marriage as a marriage that is solely solemnized by the church to the exclusion of the state, that's the intent of an ecclesiastical marriage, given the grounds from Synod 2019 and our mandate from Synod, that we actually thought that recommending an ecclesiastical marriage in the context that we're talking about with immigrant communities or traditional communities actually demeans those communities quite significantly. because it says, we as a church don't actually accept your marriage. You need to be married in the church. And so we're going to do that for you. So that was one of the reasons why we had this whole...
Now, again, back to the question about, well, obviously same-sex marriage just sort of lurks in the background of this question. And it's also the fact that, well, when the laws in the United States and Canada were basically had, female, no bigamy, marriage, the church could just sort of ride along. And didn't really matter who you were married by or when you were married by or what the ceremony was or whose name. Now, baptism in the Christian Reformed Church, as long as you're baptized in name as the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, your baptism counts. So it can be an Orthodox baptism or a Catholic baptism as long as it's in a Trinitarian church, your baptism counts. And for the most part, people would show up at church and they'd be together and you just assumed they were married. Now, it's not a completely unusual thing to, let's say, welcome a family into membership, baptize the children, have a lovely ceremony, only to discover months, if not years later that, oh, by the way, you two aren't married? that happens too. So, yeah, a lot of stuff happens in church that you might think, when someone joins the church, you don't say, and they show up with kids and stuff, can you show me the wedding, the marriage license? You don't think to ask.
Portion in our report to deal with those types of things, but as you're right, we also recognize that our mandate was to answer the question, should a pastor solemnize an ecclesiastical marriage knowing that there is going to be no state involvement and that this is a often first time coming together of a couple. And so in that light, we said we don't recommend it, but we also wanted
In other words, this was designed to address the scenario that I began the video with.
to recognize that that's not every scenario. So we came up with this recommendation. I hope that made sense. So, okay. I'm getting some nods. I teach, so I'm trying to read the room.
Specific.
Lauren has another thing, I think.
On the committee. The reason
Now, Lauren, I was in Lauren's home at one point. I don't remember when that was or where I was. I think it was in Iowa. He's just a wonderful guy. He is. He's a wonderful guy.
we included this provision or recommended it is that so often those who have a cultural or a Native American or an immigrant marriage fail to qualify for programs, entitlements, and revenue streams from the government. Then a marriage certificate is required. So for Social Security benefits, Medicaid benefits, Medicare benefits, we want everybody to be qualified to receive them and not be shocked to find out at some point that they've been unable to collect.
Can you?
Okay, so he makes the case that, well, if churches just start doing this, later on down the line, someone's going to show up and look for their Social Security benefits, and the state's going to say, well, you're not married. Well, I got married in the church. Well, you're still not married because you got to get married. Oh, so yeah, and as someone who does weddings, it's not uncommon when I talk to couples beforehand, I say, now, you're spending all this time looking at the ceremony and all of this stuff. You'd better go down to that county clerk and get that marriage license, because after the ceremony, put someone in charge that we're going to all fill this thing out and that thing's going to get mailed. Because I'll tell you, stuff can happen during the ceremony, but getting that thing in the mail, really important. And you'd be amazed how often there's a stumble and it doesn't happen.
Lauren, if you could, what about the suggestion that has been made that we strike the word Christian in grounds number 2? Do you have objection to that, or do you think that changes the motion significantly?
We've been chatting about that on the sideline, and we don't think that it changes the thrust of the point.
And I'm going to rule that with your approval and the committee's approval that we can strike the word Christian.
Oh, good. It looks like we've got out of our editing jam.
We'll consider that a friendly amendment. That's in ground number 2. So ground number 2 now reads, in the interest of grace and acceptance, we want to acknowledge the beautiful marriage traditions that have developed in various cultures. I have John from Northern Illinois and then Todd from Grand Rapids North.
So I read fully the full report, and what didn't appear at all in the report, the whole study, was a practice that we've done, is that we would have people on disability who wanted to interpromise relationships but did not want to be legally married because it changes their status as beneficiaries of benefits for Social Security.
So in other words, it's not just the senior couple that wants to live together as husband and wife, but they don't want to mess with a benefit. Now it's a disabled couple. Oh.
And this happens with elderly people. It also happens with disabled people. It's rather common that their whole status changes, so they don't want a legal marriage. So the practice that we have is that they would hold a promise commitment.
They'd get their sex license.
Call it marriage, but we use the same language, that they're making a commitment to be faithful to each other. And so I'm gathering that that's not covered under this, but I just want to be clear whether...
This is exactly what this thing is about.
It's not covered under this, because I didn't see any references to it, except that the last study person mentioned something in that area. So,
well, and I would mention as well, we're on recommendation C, which that's really not to the motion that's in front of us, unless I'm missing.
This was approved in This was approved 10 minutes ago. So that horse has already left the barn.
Something. This simply calls for us to respect and honor the marriages of immigrants. So I realize you're asking a question about the report, but this particular motion is the one that's in front of us.
But I was referring to ground 1, in which, or let's see, or maybe it's 2, but the whole matter of what a particular culture would have called marriage, even though it's not recognized as necessarily a legal marriage, would that be legit?
Mr. Chairman, I believe what he's asking about was covered under the second motion that we've already passed. But if you'd like an answer to that, I'll offer a little bit, and Lauren will correct me, but it falls under that same category as I hear it, as the senior couple who are looking at the pension issues and the pension losses and how to deal with that, and also the protections that go along with that. And I understand the situation you're speaking of a little bit too. It is different. There's some differences in there, because you're talking now about other benefits from the government that they're not going to be able to get. And the problem is, Lauren, am I correct in saying that that's still fraud? Because you're still doing a marriage, even though you're not calling it such, and so we're still possible.
And this was where fraud first comes into the conversation.
Committing fraud, and that's the way I understood it from the report. Is that correct, Lauren?
That is correct, and as a committee, we studied that and determined that that status would probably constitute what might be colloquially called marriage light. It would lack the essential objects of matrimony, and particularly if the civil regulation is being avoided, so that one of the parties might maintain a sizable pension then it would constitute fraud. And we felt that we should not encourage people to go there. It'd be better to do things decently in good order. Even our marriage formulary in the Psalter says to love, to honor, and to maintain, and to devise a method whereby we can sidestep those responsibilities is something other than the traditional marriage that we've honored and we want to use as examples to our young people.
Okay, thank you, Lauren.
So, yeah, because, I mean, think about this. So, let's say an insurance company or some company that is providing the benefits, they'd like to reduce their roles, and then they start doing some investigating, and then, you know, you visit the home and there's this beautiful couple on the mantle of these two in a wedding ceremony, and someone looks and says, "What's this picture of?" "Well, that was our wedding. I thought you weren't married." Who helped you do this? You can just imagine some lawyers figuring out how to not only try to cease benefits, but try to claw back and get the money back that they had paid out since the wedding date. Yeah, this is not an easy issue.
Just before we continue our speaker list, I've allowed a lot of latitude, but a couple of reminders. When you stand up to speak, speak to the motion. Let's not move backwards or to some broader question that you would like answered. Speak to the motion. So it helps if you identify who you are, what classes you're from. Are you in favor of the motion? Are you against the motion? Or do you have a question about the motion in front of us?
So now we're starting Synod. Now things are tightening up, and it's like, okay, let's focus a little bit.
All right. So I have now quite a list that is growing. Todd, and then Martine from Toronto, and then Stanley, Jim again.
Todd, it's not a program, it's West North. Could you scroll down a little bit? I had a friendly amendment to suggest. No, the other way. Sorry. So it says that Synod
Another friendly amendment.
encourage the churches to respect and honor the marriages of immigrants. What if we simply switch that to say that Synod encourage the churches to respect and honor the marriages of other cultures? That would cover a good
Oh, a lawyer would really love that.
deal of what has been discussed previously.
As a reporter, I think that's an incredibly good suggestion.
Now,
What's your chair think?
Do you like that?
So
It sounds very good to me. Does the committee,
Cultures other than what? What is the main culture, and what are the other cultures?
that instead of immigrant, right? That
So the
makes-
suggestion is that it would read that Synod encourage the churches to respect and honor the marriages of different cultures who did not obtain a civil marriage prior, and I'm granting that you're okay with that?
I am. If the committee doesn't argue it, we're good.
We will
Go
make
ahead.
that amendment as well.
Observation.
And this is where the friendly amendment thing sort of always unwinds, is like, everybody's like, okay, because what we want to do is we want to kind of get beyond this, because we know we're just struggling with words, and let's just get beyond this.
That if you don't also change the wording of prior to arriving in Canada or the U.S., it might sound really terrible.
It might have to be, you might have to make a different way of adding that in there.
Or just.
And this is hard. Now we're going to wordsmith on the
Yeah,
floor of
then it's
Synod, and we don't do
wordsmithing on
that.
the floor.
And I'll just make this observation.
We try to avoid it, but it always happens.
I know this is difficult on the floor, but there's a lot of people on the floor. Amendments are hard to do on the floor precisely because of that, right? So now we're in a bit of a quandary. We could remove immigrants and say different cultures, but then you have
It's confusing.
that whole prior to arriving in
What-
Canada and the United
What about-
States.
Can I suggest something? Respect and honor marriages of different cultures and immigrants, although that kind of gets into trouble at some points, who did not obtain a civil
Culture is different than.
marriage prior to arriving. What about, sorry, now I'm just on the floor and doing this.
but I actually had one other thing to
Yes,
address
what's
the
your
question.
point of order?
Yeah, we are doing the work of the committee on the floor of Synod. This ought to be sent back to
Yeah.
the committee and all the confusion we
The
have
point of order is that we're doing the work of the committee now on the floor of Synod, and, we've all got these looming deadlines coming up.
going on here.
Yeah, I'm not going to send anything back to the committee, given that we still got committee reports out, all right? I think we all know what we're intending to do here, so let's just give a little bit of patience. Let's just give a little bit of patience and get there.
So, sorry, I forgot what the other part you would change is then just get rid of who did not obtain through the
And
word.
when you're sitting on the floor, you're one of the 190 people that are just sitting there, just... Some people are like working, thinking like, well, maybe if we do this, and other people are just playing with their little hand toys.
And so it would respect and honor the marriages of different cultures and counsel them in understanding of Christian marriage. If you get rid of that, you maintain I think the meaning of the original intent would include more cultures like Native Americans.
What I'd like to remind the group of is, and I know announcements were made a while ago, we actually have a place for you to submit amendments in writing. So Todd, why don't you submit an amendment in writing, and then we can determine whether it's friendly or not. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to go around and round on words to drop and words to add. And this will be a good reminder to us going forward to think about it. And first, you should think about whether you really need to make an amendment. And
Remember how slick this was going just 10 minutes ago?
And secondly, make sure you have the whole wording correct before you suggest a change of a word. So what I'm going to make a gentle suggestion of, while we're waiting for that written amendment, is that someone make a motion that we table C. We'll come right back to it.
Can I ask a question yet, Mr. Chairman? Our helpful people to the side have already made a change on C, if you take a look on the screen, which did what you asked for, or what was asked for, I should say. And I'm not sure if it's acceptable, but if it's acceptable, it would work, if that's an acceptable sentence.
It seems to me that what works on the screen, it's acceptable to the committee, it's acceptable to Todd, that's what we'll go with then. And let's in the future remember, if you want to make an amendment, enter it in writing. That helps us be clear on what we're doing. We'll go right back to the list. Thank you for catching that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have Stanley, then Blake, then Kurt, then Samantha, and then David. To the motion.
It was also smooth just a few minutes ago.
And on point.
Stanley Jim from Red Mesa. I still have a bit of issue with the whole, even the different cultures. The different cultures is made up of Dutch, French, and all that stuff in the U.S., but they're all immigrants. We are not immigrants. We are the host nations. And I believe that maybe including indigenous cultures, for me, that would satisfy me. Because you're separating us just by saying that different cultures. And I think we have been very accommodating to you with your languages, but couldn't you at least accommodate us here? Thank you.
I'm going to remind the group right now that we do not applaud, because this will get ugly as we go forward to even more contentious issues. If we start applauding, then we're going to boo, and then we're going to, all right? So I realize the applause were well meant here.
Decorum.
But let's just watch ourselves on that, or we'll quickly descend into trouble as we move forward. And as we try to have it, people in the gallery also follow those same rules, right? So let's just be mindful as we continue to discuss. Blake and then Kurt.
Yep, Blake from Class Siciliana. Mr. Chairman, I'd recommend we table this motion and move on until a substantive friendly amendment can be written.
Someone makes a motion. There we go.
And for us to be able to look at that.
Blake is making a motion that we table this It's moved and supported. His intention is that there be some different amendment than what we currently have would be made on this. If we table this motion, we leave it and we move forward and we come back, presumably when we have a better amendment. The motion is to table. It's not debatable. If you vote yes, we leave it. We come back to it when we think we have something better. All right? All in favor of tabling the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. We have
the intrepid wordsmiths. No, no, no. We want to do it from the floor.
tabled the motion.
And so they table, and they will get back to it. So we will leave that there. And coming ahead, there is a really, I don't know if I'll cover it directly. There's an important conversation on bivocational pastors cleaning up the church order. Part of what's happening in the Christian Reformed Church is the Christian Reformed Church is increasingly assimilating into the church environment in North America. It's becoming increasingly less exceptional. Part of what made the Christian Reformed Church exceptional is that the demand of educated clergy was held for a good long time. Clergy were reasonably compensated so that they could support a family. You wouldn't get rich, but you could live and you could eat and it would be all right. And you wouldn't need a secondary job. Increasingly, there are more and more commissioned pastors, clergy who don't necessarily, some of them have more education, but who don't necessarily have an MDiv or an MDiv, Masters of Divinity from Calvin Seminary or another institution. And so in that movement, that is just sort of recommending a church order change. Church order changes require 2 years to go into effect. So they propose changes, and then they'll come back in the next synod. And that pretty much sort of tries to clean up the church order to more closely fit what the circumstances are now. That's often the way the church order goes. It usually changes happen on the ground first. There's sort of tension. It's sort of like the history of scientific revolutions. Finally, there's sort of okay, this is going to be the new norm. And that new norm is very much along the lines of the Christian Reformed Church being less exceptional and more like the dominant church environment in North America. But I did want to include this one on ecclesial marriages, and it's actually an important conversation. And so we'll see if they get the language cleaned up and so on and so forth. So anyway, thanks for watching. Now I'm really excited to watch my wife's working late today because it's time for, she's working on her report cards for her students. But I'm really excited to listen to the debate about the overture regarding denominational membership decline. But I doubt I'll have that one tonight. I've got a busy day tomorrow, and then I do head out, and I will be someplace else. Hopefully the Wi-Fi is good so I can continue to do this. I won't have all of my nice setup with my buttons and everything. I'm not quite sure how I'll keep this up, or if some stuff will have to wait until after Synod. But again, I hope, I was talking to my family this evening, and they've watched the reports. They've enjoyed them. So if you enjoy these, if they're worthwhile to you, let me know. Leave a comment or thumbs up. Thumbs up is helpful because if you put a thumbs up on a video, that tells the YouTube algorithm that other people might also find it helpful. So again, leave a comment. Thanks for watching.